Sleepy Joe Biden signs orders pushing special treatment for anti-whites. This is the end of hour one of the Jesse Lee Peterson Show. It's Thursday, January 21st, 2021. Stay tuned for hour two. Jesse Lee Peterson will be right back. But first, Hake news, not fake news. The Biden administration, so-called, looks down on you. They embrace racial equity, quote-unquote, ideology in a slew of executive action announcements, according to the Epoch Times. So-called President Joe Biden is to, quote, launch a whole-of-government initiative to advance racial equity, unquote. His transition team said in a January 20th release. Equity. Peter Svab of the Epoch Times explains that equity means equality of outcome, a concept tied to the critical theories that slice up society into identity groups based on race, gender, sexual proclivities, and others, while positing which groups are oppressed and which are the oppressors, similar to how Marxism, which is atheistic and anti-freedom as well, labels people as oppressors and oppressed based on class. Cringy libs on equity, the extremist, I went on Google and found it, the extremist Annie E. Casey Foundation explains the difference between equity and equality. Equity tries to understand and give people what they need to enjoy full, healthy lives. Equality, in contrast, aims to ensure that everyone gets the same things in order to have full, healthy lives. Like equity, equality aims to promote fairness and justice, but it can only work if everyone starts from the same place and requires the same thing. In other words, I explain, special treatment and more stuff for the fake victims, according to racial equity tools. Another source, Glossary for Racial Equity. Racial equity is the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted in a statistical sense how one fares, as one part of racial justice to address the root causes of inequities. Note that they're never honest about the causes. This includes elimination of policies, attitudes, blah, 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 that reinforce the differential outcomes by race or that fail to eliminate them. And they never rightfully blame the fake victim. A mindset and method for solving problems that have endured for generations seem intractable, harm people and communities of color most acutely, and ultimately affect people of all races. This will require seeing differently, thinking differently, and doing the work differently. So female, right? Racial equity is about results that make a difference and last. Pure evil. So this Petter guy from the Epoch Times is right. Equality of outcome. And their phony sources include Center for Assessment and Policy Development. That's very vague, right? Liberal name. And Open Source Leadership Strategies. Another liberal organization formed by an immigrant woman from India. The evil CSI, Center for Social Inclusion, defines racial equity as both an outcome and a process. See? There you go. So the so-called Biden administration on this equity thing, quote, the president-elect, and this is just before he started signing these executive orders and became the so-called president, will sign an executive order beginning the work of embedding equity across federal policymaking and rooting out systemic racism and other barriers of opportunity from federal programs and institutions, their press release said. The executive order will define equity as the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals, yeah, right, including individuals who belong to underserved communities such as Black, Latino, yeah, they're real underserved, right? More like spoiled. Indigenous and Native American persons, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and other persons of color, LGBTQ plus persons, people with disabilities, religious minorities, persons who live in rural areas, and persons otherwise affected by persistent poverty or inequality. They talk about the historically underserved and marginalized, but we all know the reality of these people being overserved, spoiled, artificially propped up, despite being unqualified. They are changing language access barriers, even having a Spanish language Casa Blanca Twitter account for White House, right? Further enabling division and stuff. And it's anti-Trump, reversing Trump's orders to get rid of the critical race theory and many other things, the 1776 Commission and the border wall. I'm James Hake.